For over 70 years, British comedy has woven itself into the fabric of our national consciousness, creating stars and helping to shape the universal television viewing experience. Comedy can be as diverse and wide-ranging as life itself, and British comedy's rich landscape epitomizes this. So please, don't adjust your set. We'll take it from here if you're not being served, as we explore the wide-ranging and often bizarre world of British comedy with some of its best-loved stars exclusively on Beyond the Title.
The writer and comedian Miles Jupp shall forever remain heavily entwined in the history of Beyond the Title, being our first guest for the first ever episode back in October 2016. Since then, he has become a regular panellist on the Radio 4 juggernaut I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue alongside Jack D, and has even found time to create his own podcast, Middle Police Umpire, alongside former cricketer Mark Wood. I caught up with a comedy heavyweight on the most southern leg of his nationwide tour to talk more about comedy and his recollections of his remarkable career in entertainment. So let's welcome back Miles Jupp. Miles, welcome back to Beyond the Title for this third helping. It occurs to me that despite speaking a handful of times, we never really have touched on radio. So in your opinion, how important is Radio 4 to the comedy landscape in the UK?
Well, I think it is quite important. I mean, there would have been a time, obviously, when that would have been Radio 4's equivalent, which would, I can't even remember what it would have been called, but when there were sort of fewer stations, it would have been one of the few outlets there were. I mean, even that thing, so, during the war, I was reading a book recently set when they sort of moved the entertainment department out to somewhere in sort of North or West Wales, I think, and you'd have these sort of basically sketch performers sort of billeted during the war and doing all the sort of light entertainment shows from there. So obviously that's not the environment in which people are doing it now. But if you think, there's probably fewer and fewer actually. There's a slight diminishing return in terms of things that convert from radio to television, say. There were, things like On the Hour, maybe Goodness Gracious Me, in the era when I was sort of getting into comedy in the 90s. And now of course it competes like everything with all these other things, but it's still a great, you can look at it as a training thing, or you can have more fun if you just look at it in your own right. You have an idea for a sitcom set in space. Well, instantly you go into a sort of television pitching meeting and they're going, space, gosh, and then they're already thinking, right, so what do we need, how do we do that? Whereas that's not a hurdle in the world of radio. It's set in space. They go, okay, yeah. What else about it? What are the characters like, or whatever? So it's a world in which people can, really be imaginative in the kind of ideas that they have. But also, it's because things are less expensive to make in terms of radio. It means that they can still, even though everything is more straightened these days, everything's more competitive, there is still a lot of chances and opportunity for people to get on air and do things. So when you used to have a show like the Now Show, someone could come on and do 3 minutes of stuff about something, and that would be quite a good way of sort of beginning it. Or the Open Door programs where anyone can write for it. There's always been, not before my time, there was weekending. I used to host a show called News Jack, which was on 7. It was before it became 4 Extra even, so this must now be sort of 15 years ago or something. But it is still a world where there's loads of opportunities. But like everything, it's now competing with other things. I was amazed recently. I did and I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue up in, it was down in Exeter, and there was sort of someone there from the digital team, and we were asked what they were doing, and they were, we filmed bits of the recording, and then we put it online. And I thought, well, that's, I wonder, is that it seems sort of at odds with the program of that heritage. And they stuck it on whatever TikTok or those sorts of things, and it went kind of bananas. And then the producer was going, we've had 10 times more people asking for tickets than normal. They already had a lot of people, so you suddenly think, these things can kind of work with each other. So that's a very long answer to the question, and the short answer would be quite important still. Yes, that would be how I would distill it.
You have become a semi-regular panellist on the BBC Radio 4 Juggernaut. I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. I was lucky enough to be able to call the legendary Barry Cryer a friend, who, as you know, along with Tim Brooke-Taylor and Graham Garden, was the longest-serving member. So with this in mind, how do you think the show has acted as a bridge between the world of variety to contemporary comedy?
Well, Barry was absolutely key to that. Even now, he has this reputation. He was someone that always had his eye on the sort of the current crop, and not in a kind of unpleasant way, as in he really enjoyed all comedy, and he acted as a sort of bridge between those things. He was very supportive and encouraging. When I first ever did a gig with him, it was a charity gig in Edinburgh, he seemed to already know who I was and was really welcoming and friendly, and you would get these if you were sometimes if it was the Saturday repeat or whatever, your phone would ring at about 1:00 and it would be Barry and saying, oh, I just listened to that, I really enjoyed it, and it was a really nice thing to hear, because obviously hearing that lovely voice, which you'll have heard so many times, that it's distinctive sort of lovely sort of cigarette enhanced tones. He was amazing for being that bridge. And Richard Morris, who is sort of very high up in radio now, I saw him giving a speech at a Christmas party a couple of years ago, and he was explaining the old days. You'd have sort of the old-fashioned lot in their sort of bow ties and one side of the room, and the sort of angry young people on the other side. And then in the middle of it was Barry Cryer, who was able to talk to everybody. And he was that thing. I would say Tim as well was a really encouraging person, and someone that would always defend people who he was a supporter of. He was, sort of quite politically, in a sort of social setting, he was very good at that sort of thing and would stand up for people. And it was sort of mad that you'd get a chance actually to work with people like that. In terms, I remember being on a sort of holiday with a friend in my early 20s, and in their car they had a CD of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, and I kept asking them to put it on. I'd never really heard it a lot, and I sort of totally loved it. And then it was amazing to find I think the first one I did was up in Chesterfield, I feel. Was that the place with the Crooked Spy? That is Chesterfield. And sitting next to Tim, and then you think, and then you're suddenly watching Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and there's Tim being really funny in that. He was in loads. His CV was incredible. We were in a dressing room somewhere, we were doing one of the live shows, and I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood had just come out, and we were talking about the Mansons, and he suddenly went, oh, I did a film with Sharon Tate. And everyone was going, you did what? He went, yeah, I did a film with her. He said she was delightful. He thought, God, this man, the incredible amount of stuff. They used to get a lot of film work, actually, the Good Use people were like, oh, great, we can get the funny people and they can elevate our...
I think did the last thing.
Yeah, I think Josh lays claim to the last interview with Tim Brooke-Taylor. You did it, a few months before he passed? I think. Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, that was a victim of COVID. Yeah, horrible. We'd just done a tour of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue in the January of that year. That's what is that? Is that 2020? It's already. Yeah, and then suddenly got the news it was really very upsetting. The only person I knew that died with COVID, and it was sort of shocking, really. But because he was, just a very sort of gentle, sort of fun man, and also someone that had a life outside of comedy. There's loads of people he knew comedy and got on really well with, but he also had a sort of world quite outside that. He wasn't dependent upon comedy for his kind of morale or sense of self. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got to speak with him. He was an extraordinary man. I remember once going on a really long. We were on tour. He drove us just me and him from Canterbury to Norwich or something, and he just, of course, had stories about everyone you've ever heard of. And I was just sort of sitting in the passenger seat, and And I remember he got fined because he hadn't paid for the Dartford Tunnel. But I was very happy to have paid that £2.10 for him to be on the receiving end of the anecdotes.
What do you like about radio?
I think, the sense of freedom that can come with it. I actually really like as well, and you get it a bit with stand-up, or you get it as well if you're sort of filming something in sort of very close up, I suppose. But I really like being able to do sort of precise, detailed work, and I like it when that you can do stuff that's at odds with that, when you're doing sort of big wow, the sort of when you're making those sorts of noises. But I also like doing very definite, precise work where it is a sort of what I do. It's quite wordy. It's not word play, but it's heavily word dependent, and I think radio helps you to really focus on that as a listener, but also as a performer. The microphone is right there, and you can talk to an audience as if you're talking to an individual, as I'm talking to now. So you can be very precise about those things, and you can bring it right down to a whisper almost, or you can get a bit louder, but you can be very particular. And I find things like structure, things like that quite, things I have to work very hard at. Well, I really like working on the little details. So I love the idea when you're on a show like that, you just suddenly think of an answer that's 4 words long, and you'd have to choose which of the 4 words you put the stress on, then you lean into the mic and you deliver it, and it pays off. I think those moments are glorious. There's a kind of familiarity as well with the audience. Sometimes you have to battle against it, but with the news quiz, when the regulars were on, there'd be this sort of warmth from the audience, and Clue, of course, when you I suppose more so when you were doing it with people like Graham and with Tim and Barry, that kind of the almost slightly possessive nature of the audience, I suppose. They're so familiar with these voices, and if someone that you see on telly all the time, say when they come onto stage, you're used to the way they sound and the way they look or whatever, whereas in a way seeing people whose voices you only heard on stage do the thing, it's sort of more of a treat, I suppose. So I love the audience aspect of radio as well.
You're now no stranger to the podcast format yourself and host the cricket-based podcast Middle Please Umpire. How do you think podcasts have changed the way that comedians execute material?
I think there's a sense now with podcasts, it's sort of like at school when you get that thing from the teacher saying, show your working please. Yes, that's the right answer, but how did you get there? And I think podcasts, sort of where you're doing that, you're hearing a lot of people sort of thinking out loud. I mean, there's not many comics that do sort of scripted podcasts. Really, that is a way of getting something that you've written out there, but a lot of it's just sort of chat and that's distilled. So it means that there's a kind of a friend of mine referred to it as a slightly sort of banter-based economy now, but it means that the sort of chat and, can I call it waffle? Am I being fair? There's an element of that where these things are sort of very long.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of waffling in between, isn't there?
But then it's throat clearing. I write with a guy called James Kettle a lot, and he directed this show, and we would, he'd say just when we were writing in a room, or he goes, I'd say, look at this paragraph, actually, what was I thinking then? He goes, you're throat clearing, that's absolutely fine, you're getting it all out there, and then you can sort of cut it back. And you could hard edit podcasts, couldn't you, down from 50 minutes to 12 really funny minutes or whatever. And I guess but the thing is, because of the niche aspect of it, you don't mind that. I think with a podcast, you're tuning into some people that you really like, and you think, I've heard their really good stuff. I want to hear the moment they have an idea. Like when you watch Get Back and you see the Beatles sort of come up with a song, in those sorts of moments, you are witnessing the actual moment of creativity, not the end sort of polished result, I suppose. And that's kind of a good aspect of it if you're technically interested in it. I was talking to my comedy agent this morning about this thing where people put sort of clips of themselves doing banter with a crowd on Instagram, and people do lots of sort of funny exchanges or whatever it might be. And I thought, because I'm into the way comedy works, I'm not that's all fine, they're being amusing, but from my point of view, technically, what I want to see is little clips of people doing some banter and then how they segue back into their material. That's the bit that I'm interested in, which of course would be incredibly niche, and it would just be only for sort of people with that kind of technical interest for comedy. But maybe that's out there. Perhaps I could do a podcast called Segue, where I interview Dara or someone about how did you get from that bit to that bit. So, and it's sort of more of a hobby thing to us. That's why we don't do one every week or whatever it might be. It's when he's not playing and I'm not busy, we go, the producer says, could we fit 6 episodes in or whatever. But I think, I I'm now really good friends with Mark, and that seems mad. I'd never met him in 2019. I'd been in the crowd watching him win a World Cup final, but I hadn't met him until we started doing the podcast. And now, we get on really well, and he's, his family and stuff like that. But I've also got. He's an England cricketer. That's kind of so. I might have a completely normal conversation with him on the phone, and then when I hang up and someone say, "Who's that?" I go, "Oh, I was just talking to an international cricketer." That's all. That's still there. And I think that fact. I imagine that Greg and Felix, despite being sort of very well known themselves, are, I think, from the fanboy perspective, are probably still quite starstruck by Jimmy.
Yeah.
We're back at the Medina Theatre where you've returned to another stand-up show. What can we expect?
Well, this show is a story, a true story. I think I've done two sort of more straight, just sort of stand-up-y ones here. In 2021, I had a brain seizure, and when I was working in London, and it was caused, it turned out, by a benign tumour, something called a this is a squeaky band for that particular, very difficult, there's a lot of syllables in that word, I don't want it to be broken up by a squeak. It was caused by something called a meningioma. They're normally benign, but it was benign, but it was a tumour, so I needed to have a craniotomy, needed to have brain surgery about it. And it is the story of that, but told, through jokes and stand-up routines, really. I started writing down what had happened because afterwards I was a bit sort of unclear. I couldn't work out all the orders of events in my head and things like that. And then I started sort of writing it down just so I knew. And then after a while I thought, well, the way I like to tell stories is comedically. If I was a poet, it would be a poem or an essayist or whatever. But to me, I thought I would like to be able to answer the question, what was that like to people? And I want to communicate how frightening it is and where one's head goes emotionally. But also, of course, you're going on an exciting journey. Too exciting at times, really. From my perspective, not from the audiences, which are absolutely fine. But in terms of what happened to me, you want to communicate some of that, and comedy seemed to me to be a great, an accessible way of doing that. You sit people down and tell them the hard facts. That's, which you might do actually with someone else that's gone through a similar experience, but to tell other people about it, that seems to me to be a good way of doing it. It means that you have a story, and once you've got a story, that means that's the kind of spine of your show, and you can go off in other directions. It's like that bit's the Christmas tree, and all the jokes of the baubles and the flashing lights.
It's almost a therapy.
Well, it is cathartic in a way. The writing of it was, and it's sometimes it's not until you've written something down that you realise that you thought it in a way. Then when you're doing the show, actually, you're in show mode. You're thinking, I've got to remember that word there because in 40 minutes' time there's something that refers back to it, and I want to hit the rhythm of it. And actually, that's sort of I'm doing a show. And then afterwards, though, sometimes in a show like this, people come along because they've had a similar experience, and you actually, if you have something like that, you don't necessarily meet people that have had that. On your ward, you're not really chatting to each other, and then afterwards, you get invited to an MRI or whatever. The next person waiting, they could be there for a completely different thing. You don't actually come into contact with other people that have had a similar experience. So actually, some of the catharsis has been sort of chatting with people after the shows about it, which has been, and for whatever reason, it hadn't occurred to me that would happen. But I'm sort of thrilled by that. Actually, I've found it really, really useful. But yeah, as I say, in the show, it is you're at work and you've got the suit on. I wear a suit now, suit and tie. That's a little sneak preview. Sometimes a little pocket handkerchief. You're in show mode and you're trying to sort of entertain people. But the creative aspect of it, the writing bit, and then meaning that I've got involved in a couple of charities, but also just meeting at the stage door and the foyer people that have been through similar experiences. That's been a sort of cathartic aspect to it. But it is a piece of entertainment. But hopefully there's lots of jokes in it. I mean, you'll see it later. I'll allow you to be the judge of that.
It was a bit like when Billy Connolly did that routine about his dad, and it was quite dark, but then it just helped him sort of talk about it and get through it.
Yeah, there is that thing. Sometimes maybe a joke is something that can bring something to the surface. Obviously, that's one of the things when people talk about certain things you shouldn't joke about, and you think, well, there's some things that people are joking about that people aren't talking seriously about. So that's what brings the bubble to the surface, and it may be sort of a bit of gas at first, but actually that is useful. And yes, I mean, if you can wrap something up in jokes, and then the actual truth can be in there. You want to tell people how terrified you are, write 4 jokes about being terrified, and then you have communicated that, hopefully. Or you can just say, I was really terrified, and hopefully they'll believe you.
Looking back at your career, what's your proudest achievement?
Well, a few days ago I realised it was 25 years since I first stood on stage in a sort of professional environment, in a comedy club in Edinburgh, the Stand, did my first stand-up gig. So that was 25 years, and you think that's how this really started for me. Not my interest, I had long before, but that's how that was the first time I, stood on a stage in a kind of professional environment and started doing this. So I love the fact that I am still doing this, but also the places I've gone because of it, and I all of the things, not all of them, but lots of things that I kind of value in different ways. I mean, like Balamory, for instance, would not have been what I was expecting to, or would have thought I would do, but it was something that came along, and I was really young, and I got amazing experience out of it and met really good friends, and it meant that by the age of by the time I was 24, 25, I'd done 52 weeks of single camera shooting in a studio and stuff, and you learn, and I started that knowing absolutely nothing, and not knowing what any of the language meant or what people were telling me about, and that sort of made me think, I don't just like doing comedy, I do like acting, and I really enjoy the company of actors and crews and directors and all that sort of world. And so, then being a couple of episodes of the thick of it, maybe a decade later, no, maybe not as long as that, so 7 years, or that it still excites me that I've done that at all. I guess I haven't seen the 3rd series of it, but I think Rev was good and was completely life-changing for me. More recently, I guess, doing like the Full Monty series was amazing, and the Durrells was just like complete bliss, really. I think that it's on ITVX. Why Didn't They Ask Evans, which is Hugh Laurie adapted Agatha Christie's sort of standalone novel and directed a 3-part sort of mini series, and I just loved that. I mean, I just couldn't believe I was there, and now I can't. I mean, he's such a good guy, and he's really really fun company. And as a director, I found him really encouraging, and that was great. But also, like when you're talking about being friends with cricketers, that's someone that I watched in the 90s and was one of the crowd of people that were making like, I want to do the sort of thing they do. So that was kind of mad in a way. But once you're on a set with someone, actually you can sort of park that for whatever reason. But I'm really proud to be in that, and that is No, I love the fact that I got to be in that. That was really great.
Yeah. Ever been starstruck?
Have you ever been starstruck?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's sort of the sort of. And with people that are within acting or comedy, slightly less so, just because even though, of course, they might be at these amazing dizzy heights, you do the same sort of thing, and you have a kind of understanding of it, and you possibly have friends in common or whatever it might be. Oddly, although the heights they've achieved are sort of unattainable, or they may be unimaginable, they're not unattainable in a way, and you kind of think, well, we're in the same kind of, area, I suppose, without sort of claiming to have anything like their success. But there's something about it that can be a leveler. You may find yourself at the moment standing in front of them on a set. You're both listening to the same instructions, or what is going on now? All right, that's the way people with 4x4s behave, I'm afraid. There's something about it which takes that away. That said, I did a small part in a film in Germany with why can't I remember his name? He's incredibly famous. He was in ER. He's a massive movie star.
George Clooney.
And this will be the brain of mine, but it's largely back together, I think. I actually remember just getting onto the set, you're in these awesome costumes, and then actually being phenomenally nervous for sort of half an hour. Luckily there was sort of technical stuff going on, it sort of gave you time to calm down and just think, we're all at work, that's what we need to do, we're here to do the things we know how to do. But actually it seemed sort of mad that I would come out of my trailer and he was there sort of chatting to someone about his costume, and you think, but you're George Clooney, and that did seem mad. I was sort of able to get over it, but half an hour I thought, I don't know if I'm capable of doing the single thing they've asked me to come here to do.
So, just to finish off, what's next for Miles Jupp?
Well, I'm touring this show until April the 9th at present. I may do it again in some other countries at the end of the year or next year. Maybe there's some writing things that I'm doing. I'm trying to adapt a novel that I really like into a film script. I've got a few other writing ideas. Like everyone, going up to auditions, seeing what comes of them, if anything. And also, I've got some episodes of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue coming up, and that sort of thing. But also, I've been doing the show. I've done this show nearly 120 times or something by the time I get to that April, so I wouldn't mind a rest of some sort. But then it's quite hard to rest if you don't know what's coming after. People always talk about a holiday before a job you've got is a sort of unbelievable thing in that. But we've got one child in GCSEs this summer, so it's probably not a bad idea if I'm at home to be perfectly honest, and just reminding them that there's books upstairs that they could be reading and that sort of thing.
Thank you very much to our wonderful guest for being the subject of another Beyond the Title episode. If you like this, why not browse the website and see if there's anything else you like. We're now on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Music and Amazon Music. Everywhere, quite frankly. Don't forget to like our Facebook page to receive updates on forthcoming interviews, and please do give this podcast a little share. Not in a shoop-shoop song kind of way, you understand, although that's probably quite welcome. Thanks again. Hopefully see you next time. From all of us here, goodbye.